We are ready to continue with 4.2. So we are continuing to look at different types of deposit. We look through checking accounts, probably review for a lot of you. All right. And then you had the 4.2 check review worksheet. So it starts out, we have 6 transactions that we need to account for within this account. And so it says we start out with 250. So I'm going to put that there as a basis. Okay. So then on January 13th, Katie buys a new pair of basketball shoes, writes check 105 to Slam Dunk Sports for 82.25. So I'm going to put in 105 on January 13th to Slam Dunk Sports. Payment amount was 82.25. So I'm going to subtract 82.25, bringing me to 167.75. Then on January 30th, we go shopping at the Black Dress Boutique. We buy a dress and heels for $78.96 using a debit card. So we don't have a check number. So I'm just going to put DC for debit card, right? You could have wrote debit. When you're writing some sort of shorthand code, it's really up to you what you want to put there that'll make sense. We take out 78.96 to get us to 88.79. Then on February 1st, Katie's paycheck of 650 is automatically deposited into her account. So I'm going to put D for deposit on the first. Paycheck, baby. 650. I'm going to add 650 to this, which takes me to 738.79. Also on the first, Katie pays her monthly rent. She writes check 106 to Apex Apartments in the amount of 565. That is 173.79. On February 5th, Katie drives through her bank's ATM and withdraws $35 cash. So I'm going to put a code for ATM. So they take out $35. It takes down to 138.79. Then on February 7th, Katie deposits a check. Ending up with 153.79. All right, so you should have something that looks like that. Then below, we're going to write out these checks. So the check 105 was on January 13th. And that was to Slam Dunk Sports for the amount of 82.25. Katie Smith was the account holder, so it would be her signature. And this was for shoes. Okay. Remember that when we're writing out dollar amounts or when we're writing out numbers in general, all right, if it ends in a Y, we generally hyphenate it. Okay. And then the only time that we put and in a number is to signify where the period goes or where the decimal spot goes. All right. So it doesn't matter how big of a number it is. It could be 1,623,912, right? There's no and in that number. Okay. But if it becomes, 2,843,902 and 67 cents, right? Then we say the word and where the decimal would go. So in this case, 82.25 is $82 and 25 1/100ths of a dollar, right? Because we're dealing with a fraction of a dollar. We don't need to write out or in this case, type out the word dollars because it's already here on the check. All right, so we don't write $82 or $82 and $25 because dollars is already on there for us. Okay, check 106 was written on February 1st to Apex Apartments, $565. So I could just do 565, okay, and that would work. Okay, I could also do and 0 hundredths if I wanted to do that as well. Okay, either way would work. And Katie Smith signs it. The February rent. All right. Then on the back side, we have 3 checks that we have received or that individuals have received, and we need to indicate what the proper endorsement would be. So number 1 says Doug Meyer endorsed a paycheck with the intent to cash it at his bank. So in this case, the only thing that Doug needs to do is sign the check. All right. He could put the account number on there, but generally he doesn't need to. Okay. The only thing you really need on a blank endorsement to cash it is your signature. Number 2, Lisa Hart endorses her birthday check from her grandpa to deposit into her checking account. Her account number is da 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 da. So Lisa would sign it. That would be technically enough to deposit it into her account, but it's not very secure. If Lisa signs the back of that check with a blank endorsement and then loses the check, let's say she drops it, falls out of her pocket, whatever, somebody else picks it up, because it's endorsed, they can cash that check or deposit the check themselves, even though they're not the check writer, even though they're not the payee, the person receiving the check, because that check is endorsed, anybody can cash or deposit it. So to be a little bit more secure, she can do a restrictive endorsement, which restricts the check to only deposit, and it restricts it to only be deposited into that particular account. So now if she loses that check on the way to the bank, falls out of her pocket, somebody takes it, whatever, okay, they're not going to be able to do anything other than deposit it and have it deposited into this particular account. Okay, so it really does help protect her. Number 3, Jesse Taylor receives a check, but owes Bill Dunn money. Instead of depositing her check, she endorses it over to Bill. So now she's going to turn the back of the check into kind of a similar, like kind of a second check by writing pay to the order of, just like on the front of checks, right? Pay to the order of, and then we write out the payee. Now they're going to turn the back into that same type of form. So pay to the order of Bill Dunn. And then Jesse signs it. Okay, Jesse does not include her account number because Bill Dunn is going to receive this check and then he'll need to endorse it, right? And so if he deposits it, he'll end up putting his own account number on the back. So Jesse doesn't want to write her account number on there because if she writes 659412 and then later on Bill signs it, right, and writes for deposit only, and maybe that's his account number, right? A bank teller gets this, sees that he wants to deposit it. If that bank teller happens to see that number first, okay, they could make a mistake and put it right back into Jesse Taylor's account, which defeats the entire purpose. All right, so Jesse doesn't want to include that because when Bill Dunn receives the check and endorses it himself, okay, he's going to put his own account number on there. Okay, makes sense? Hopefully that was all relatively straightforward in a lot of ways, a review in some aspects, okay? But we are now ready to move on to talk about reconciliations. When you were going through the notes about checking accounts, when we looked at your check register, okay, there was this column here with a check mark, okay? And I said, ignore that for now. We'll come back to that. Now we're going to talk about that. Reconciling our account. If you might have heard other people talk about if they need to balance their checkbook. That's really what this means. The idea of reconciling just means when there's a disagreement and you need to come to an understanding, right? You might hear like a couple in a relationship, a married couple, for example, they might get in an argument and then they need to reconcile, right? So all that means is, maybe they have an agreement that they never want to go to bed angry. So before they go to sleep, they reconcile. All right. And so all that means is that they're going to come to an understanding or come to an agreement. All right. So when we're talking about checking accounts, when we reconcile, it means that the bank's record of our account and our own records don't match up. They're fighting with each other. They're disagreeing with each other. We need to get them to agree. We need to come together. We need to make a balance. Okay. So reconciling just simply is balancing your records with the bank's records that show up on your bank statement. All right. Now, ideally, you do this once a month, but at a minimum, okay. But you can certainly do it more often. In truth, I don't. The process that I'm going to walk you through, I did habitually when I first got a checking account, and I did it for years because I didn't want to accidentally write a bad check or have it bounce or go negative or anything like that. I don't go through this process now, but I still understand the process, and instead I actually do something a little bit more informal on my own every couple of days with before online banking and really before, being able to mobile banking, before able to get your information instantaneously anytime that you wanted online, right? You would wait to get your checking bank statement every month. And so you would sit down with your statement and you would reconcile, and it was a quick little process of 15 minutes or whatever. But now I don't wait until the statement gets generated each month. I go through this every couple of days and I just log on to my banking app and I open up, a list of transactions and I go through it really quick and look at the transactions from the last 2 or 3 days and make sure that that matches up to my own records. And the reason I kind of alluded to this, the reason that you want to do this is to ensure, number one, that you're keeping track of everything and that you're not going to go negative or bounce a check or, spend more on a debit card than you have in your account. And number two, it helps to identify any possible signs of fraud. Okay, if there are transactions that start showing up in your bank statement, if you wait until you get that once a month, or just by logging into your online banking, right? Looking over the transactions, if you start to see transactions that you didn't authorize or that you don't recognize, it could mean that somebody has access to your account and they're using your money. And so I would never wait an entire month to do this process because I want to check that much more frequently. It used to be you could only do it about once a month because you would have to wait for that statement to get mailed to you. Now you can do it as often as you would like. And so, like I said, I do this every couple of days just to make sure that I'm staying on top of my account and make sure that I am spotting any possible signs of fraud or any sometimes mistake that might occur. One time, just about a year ago, case in point, there was a mistake that showed up. Went out to a restaurant, right? And so they run your card to hold the amount, and then they come out, they bring you a check, you sign it, whatever. But they don't, when they first run it, they don't run it for the exact amount because they want to wait and see how much you tip. So they don't necessarily know exactly what the bill is going to be when they run your card. So it just places a temporary hold on card. You fill it out, and then they go in and they complete the transaction by putting in the correct amount. Well, the individual I'm assuming it was an honest mistake. The bill came out to be, whatever, I don't know what it was, $34, $35, whatever. Probably not that much. It was low 30s, but the bill ended up, or with a tip, ended up being like $38 overall, right? Well, when they went back in, they switched the numbers and it charged me, instead of $38, it charged me $83. And so checking it, I was able to see that error, within a day or so. A $50 difference is pretty significant. And so we were able to get that corrected, right? But if I waited until the statement was generated, 3 weeks later, or if I didn't do this at all, right, I never would have caught that. I would have been out $50 extra. So it is important that you actually do this. Mistakes happen more often than you would think. And unfortunately, bank fraud and identity theft, credit fraud, those types of things happen much more frequently than you would think as well. And so you want to stay on top of your accounts. So anyway, do it at least once a month when you get your statement, but with online banking and mobile banking, you can certainly do it more often than that. All right. As I said, knowing the correct balance helps you avoid bouncing checks, incurring fees, going negatives, right? In addition to just honest mistakes, okay, one of the reasons why your records and the bank records might not match up is something called the float time of a payment. All right. My niece's birthday was last month in August. And I don't do it anymore, but when she was younger, I would write a check sometimes and I would mail it to her for her birthday. And so, I might write it on, let's say, August 10th, and it mails out on August 11th. It takes a couple of days to get back to Colorado. So maybe she gets it on the 13th or 14th. She couldn't drive, so she would have to wait till mom or dad took her to the bank to deposit it. Maybe they wait several days and they don't get to the bank until the 18th or 19th to deposit it. Right. So now it's been almost 10 days from the time that I wrote the check to when the check is processed and the money actually comes out of my account. Well, when I write the check, I subtract that amount from my account, but the money is still there. I'm just subtracting it out of my own record so that I don't spend it, right? Because I don't want to write the check, not account for it, wait till it comes out, and then subtract 50 or 100 or whatever the check is for, because I might end up spending that in the interim, and now that check is going to bounce. All right. So if I check my balance online anytime between when I wrote the check and when it was actually cashed, right? If I just relied only on that amount, the amount that it's showing might not be the amount that I actually could spend, because I've already allotted the amount, the money toward my niece that I've written on that check. All right. So the float is any time between when a transaction occurs. Usually when you write a check, but it doesn't have to be. It could be, use your debit card and it doesn't show up online until the next day, or maybe the statement is printed today, goes out in the mail. I get it in 2 days. But the time that it was written, I hadn't used that card, but now I have, right? And so it wouldn't show up on the statement yet. It wouldn't show up on those lists of transactions. So the point is, just understand that the amount that shows up on your online banking or that shows up on your statement might not be down to the penny. It might not be correct because of this float time, because of this delay between when a transaction occurs and when it actually shows up in your statement or when the money actually comes out of your account. Okay, so having said that, how do we actually reconcile? If we look at our bank statement or if we look at our online banking and we compare it to our own records, if the numbers don't match, how do we actually get them to agree? All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is compare the two things, your monthly statement or your online banking, account info, and compare it to your own records, whether you're keeping that in your check register, whether you're keeping it, in a notebook or on a spreadsheet, right? Whatever. How do you compare those things? So here's an example of it. So in this, right, this says that my current balance is 91.41, but my own records come down to whatever. I'm going to be at, 30. I don't know what it is. If I went through and added all this up, those numbers aren't going to match up. Okay. So this says I'm at 74.94. Okay. This says I'm at 91.41. So obviously those two things aren't matching up. So I need to reconcile. All right. So I'm going to go through, and any transaction that appears on my bank statement or appears on my online account information that's also in my own record, whether it's in the check register or spreadsheet or however I'm keeping it, I'm going to put a check mark by that transaction. Right. And then on the statement itself, if I've printed that off or whatever, I can check that off too, just to remind myself I've already taken care of that. Right. So I go through, check off all these transactions that also appeared on my bank statement. All right. Then I'm going to take my balance that the bank says I have. So whether it's the online amount or on the bank statement, in this case, it's 91.49. And any transactions on here that don't have a check mark are going to be considered outstanding. Now, outstanding in everyday language means like wonderful, fantastic, great. In finance, in monetary terms, outstanding means it's missing. Okay, so an outstanding transaction isn't great. It means that it just hasn't shown up yet. Okay, so all of these transactions, so this payment of 43.72, that's an outstanding check, meaning it hasn't processed yet. This debit card purchase of 275 is outstanding. This deposit of $30 is outstanding. So I've got a record of it, but it wasn't on the bank statement. Okay. So I'm going to take that bank statement, the 9149 that was right here, and I'm going to add any outstanding deposits, any transactions that haven't cleared the bank that are going to add to my balance. Okay, so I add that $30 outstanding deposit. That brings me up to 121.41. Then I'm going to subtract any outstanding withdrawals and calculate. So there were those two outstanding withdrawals. I subtract those. That gets me down to 74.94. I'm going to compare that with my own records, my check register. Okay. If those numbers match, hey, now I've gotten them to agree. I've reconciled. If they don't match, I need to go back through, double check my math, right? Make sure that I've accounted for any fees that may have been taken out of my account, that I've accounted for any interest that could have been paid, that all the transactions are there, right? So I want to check for any errors on my end or any transactions that I forgot, right? If I go through that and I still get a different number, right? Check it again. Eventually, though, if you can't get those things reconciled, it could be time to go to your bank and sit down with a banker and go through it, try to find the error, at least call them up and go through it over the phone or use the online chat. You know, communicate with your bank to reconcile. All right. So in your note sheet, there is this example, and I'm going to go through this together just so that you can see how this would work, right? So we've got a check register. So this is our own record of transactions. We've got the bank statement provided here from the bank, and we're going to reconcile. All right. So the first transaction on there is check 490. Okay, for 1092. And if I look down on my bank statement, they have a record of it. Okay, so it's in both locations, so I can check those off. Okay, next transaction, check 491 for $15 is on the bank statement. So they've accounted for it. They've taken that $15 out of the account. So I'll check those off. Next transaction, 492. No, that $35 check is not on my bank statement. So I wrote Max a check to tune my violin. Max, by the time that this bank statement was printed and mailed or whatever, he hadn't gotten to the bank to deposit it yet. Okay. So the bank doesn't know that I've written that check. They don't have a record of it. They have no idea how much it is. So they haven't taken that money out. I still have accounted for that. Okay. So I want to make sure that I don't spend that. Hey, Scott. Nate, make sure that when you're joining class that you're on mute, please. Thank you. Okay, so I need to make sure that I account for that $35, even though the bank hasn't taken it out yet. I need to make sure that that I don't spend that. All right. So I'm going to come back to that, make a note of it that it's outstanding. They don't have a record of it. Okay, next transaction, a deposit of $45 on the 9th is on my bank statement. So I can check that off. Right, check 493 for 3650 is on the statement. So the bank has accounted for that, taking that money out. I can check it off. The last two transactions, a paycheck for 127.67 and a check for 28.49 are not on the bank statement. So I cannot check those off. Now, I didn't even need to look down at the specific transactions to know that these two transactions weren't going to be on there because they occurred on the 17th. And this bank statement was printed on the 16th, right? Obviously, these occurred after this was printed. They weren't going to be on there. All right. So one of the mistakes that I see often is that then students say, well, those occurred after the statement. I'm not going to include them. That would be incorrect. Okay, because I want to know how much money I have available to me in the account now, not necessarily a few days ago when this bank statement was printed and then mailed out to me. All right. So even though these occurred after the bank statement was printed, I still include them in this process. All right. So those two aren't on there. Again, I'm going to include them even though they occurred after the statement was printed. Okay. So now I'm going to come over here and fill out this section of the reconciliation. So my checkbook balance, my records say I have 868.20, but the bank statement says that I have 804.02. Obviously, those numbers aren't the same. They're disagreeing with each other. They're in conflict. I need to reconcile. I need to have them come to an agreement. Okay, so I'm going to list any outstanding deposits. So anything that doesn't have a check by it. So this $35 is a payment. That's not a deposit. This $28.49 is outstanding, but it again is a payment. I only have one outstanding deposit, and that's this $127.67. If I had more, I'd list those there, but I just have that one. So total is just the $127.67. I have two outstanding payments though, $35 and $28.49. So I'm going to write both of those, and altogether it's $63.49. All right. And so now I'm going to, everything below this thick black line here, I'm going to do to try to make it match the number that's above the line. So I'm going to take 804.02 and I'm going to add the 127.67 and then subtract the 63.49 and put that into line B. So 104.02 plus 127.67 minus 63.49 is 868.20. Now I compare that with line A. Do they match? They do. Hooray! I've reconciled. Okay. If they didn't match, I would need to go back and try it again. All right. So the first common mistake, as I said, is students not including transactions that occur after the statement was printed. You include all of them. The second biggest mistake that I see is when students go through this and they don't get these numbers to match, and they just give up and they say, "Oh well." Right? If I had done this and I did the math incorrect, or maybe I forgot one of these transactions or something, and I got down and this was $840. Well, again, 840 isn't the same as 868. I don't know for sure how much money I have available to me. I need to know that. So I would need to go through it again. So if the two numbers, once you go through the process, if that doesn't match, okay, you need to try again. You need to go back to it. Okay, so make sure that you do one activity for today, and it is this checking account reconciliation. I'm going to kind of walk you through this. It's similar to the example we just did, but obviously more in-depth and more expansive. So we have a list of all of the transactions within the month and then an area below that in which to record those. So we can see that we start the month off with 4188, and that opening balance, or that starting balance, is already listed there. So the first transaction is on the 3rd. We have a paycheck deposit for $1134.10. So the number is, we don't have a check number, so a code, I'm just going to put D for deposit on the 3rd. Paycheck deposit, no payment, it's the deposit amount for $1134.10. And so then if I have 4188 plus the deposit of $1134.10, that puts me at $1175.98. All right, the next transaction, we were on the 4th, we write check 121 to Good and Fresh Foods for $47.70. So down here, the next transaction, we have a code of 121. That's the check number that we wrote on the 4th. Okay, so Good and Fresh Foods, and the payment amount is $47.70. So that amount is going to be subtracted from my previous balance, $1175.98 minus $47.70 is $1128.28. Next transaction, I write check 122 to Manny's Garage for $224.85 on the 7th. So check 122 on the 7th to Manny's Garage for $224.85. So again, that's a payment amount that's going to come out of our current balance, so $1128.28 minus $224.85 leaves me with $903.43, and so on. Okay, so I'm going to go down this list, and I'm going to just put each of these transactions into this check register. All right, then the next page, we receive our statement from the bank. Okay, and it's got all the transactions that they have a record of. And then below that, I'm going to reconcile. Now you can see the reconciliation here is in a little bit different form. All right, but again, you know, it's the same basic process. We're going to list any outstanding withdrawals, any outstanding deposits. We're going to take what the bank says that I have. So if I look up here, the bank says my ending balance is $343.31. Okay, so down here, I'm going to start with $343.31. Any outstanding deposits from here will be added and get me a subtotal. Then any outstanding withdrawals from here will be subtracted. And then this number whatever this number ends up being, as it says, should be the same total, same number as my checkbook register. So whatever I end up down here, right, whatever this last number is at the end of the month should be the same as what's here. If those two numbers, after going through this process, don't match, there's an error somewhere. You need to go back and try to find where that mistake happened and get it to reconcile. All right. So once you actually record all of your transactions, all right, then you will use this check mark column to help identify where the outstanding deposits and withdrawals, if there are any, where they are located, right? Which transactions are they? Put a little note off to the side to help walk through how to use that check mark column to help us reconcile. So as it says, to check up a transaction in the check mark column, right click on the box to bring it to the format options and select the check mark to change the symbol. So for example, on this first line item, the paycheck deposit for 11/34/10 on the 3rd, if I come over here to the bank's records, I see that paycheck, all right, was deposited or a customer deposit for 11/34/10 on the 3rd. So I can check that off because the bank received that and processed it. So in order to do that, right click, select a check mark, and it's become a check mark. I do that over here as well. Make sure that I have both sides indicated that I received it, that the bank received it, it's been processed, I've taken care of it. All right, the next transaction is check 121 for Good and Fresh Foods for $47.70. If I come down here on the 4th, the bank received check 121 for $47.70 and withdrew that money. So I can check that off in both spots. Check 122, Manny's Garage for $224.85. Okay, check 122 is here. So the bank received it, they processed it, they withdrew the money, or they subtracted that money from the account, so I can check those off. All right, so I'm going to go down. Obviously, I would have a list of however many transactions there are, and I'm going to compare each transaction that I have recorded to the bank's records. That way I can identify the transactions that don't have a check mark, that don't show up on here. I then know those are my outstanding transactions. So again, this is what you're going to be working on. Okay, put all of these into your check register. Okay, put in the balance here. Go through, once you add all of the transactions, go through, compare the bank's records to your records. Okay, check off any transactions that are in both. If there's anything in here that the bank left out, right, you're not going to check that off because that's outstanding. Okay, if the bank has anything that maybe you forgot to write in, okay, add that in. But again, whatever you end up here at the bottom of this column, whatever your ending balance is not going to match that 343.31 that the bank has. So you're going to have to reconcile, find all of your outstanding deposits, withdrawals, use this form. This number down here should match the number that you end up here. Okay, if they don't match, try again. So do your best. If you have any questions, I will be here. Reach out to me. Otherwise, we'll go over this tomorrow. Okay, see everybody.